Hello, everybody. This is episode 9 of Existential, and today we talk about how to teach any skill. But before we continue, I want to give a brief thanks to our sponsor. All right, so this is a really interesting idea. And by the way, I wanted to make a couple mentions. Number one, I apologize for the break between episodes. Holidays and season and whatnot got in the way. Busy circumstances and whatnot. Number two, I am working on getting a better microphone to improve the sound quality and just to improve the overall aesthetic of the sound of my voice. So today we talk about how to teach anything, and that's a pretty big umbrella. So I want to make just before I talk about the idea specifically, I want to make a very important distinction. There are skills that are taught through academia for more academia. Then there are skills in the field that you have to only learn in the field, right? People cannot learn how to, there are many jobs that you cannot learn in college to perform out in the field. For instance, you cannot learn how to be a handyman or a worker in college. You can learn what kind of nuts and bolts there are. You can learn what type of hammer it is. You can learn a thing, right? You can learn a lot of logistics, but the fact of the matter is that you cannot learn a certain skill in there. You cannot learn a physical skill through academia, and you cannot learn, academia through sitting in a courtroom, right? There is experiential knowledge, and then there is the knowledge, textbook knowledge, right? Every person who has a career, right, a very known career. I'm not talking about a chef, right? I'm talking about normal college career type of things, right? Everyone who has an established career can attest to that. The advancement of a career is separated in two things, right? You need the experience and you need the textbook knowledge, right? It's a mix of these two ideas. So I wanted to make a brief distinction of that before we kind of continue, right? So how to teach anything, I'm more talking about a skill. I'm not speaking about academia because there's only so much you can learn there. I'm talking about teaching a physical skill. Funny enough, though, there is a little bit of academia in the route that I'm going to teach you how to do it, right? But for the most part, I'm teaching you how to manipulate someone's mind in order to paint a better picture of what you're asking someone to do or what you're teaching someone, be it cooking or be it anything specifically within the arts or anything, one of the therapeutic arts like gardening or planting. They usually, right, that's what I really want to pinpoint here. So we have to first dive into teaching as an activity. Teaching is relatability. So what does it mean when I say teaching equals relatability? When you teach something, you are trying to relate the skill. I'm trying to transfer 100% of my capacity in this skill and make your skill 100% of that capacity, right? So if I'm painting like Bob Ross, I want you to paint like Bob Ross, right? So it's a relatability thing. Now it becomes a question of how do I better translate my skill to you? How can I better transfer my expertise to you to the same degree that I have it. So not to get too metaphysical here, right? Not to get too metaphorical, right? But it's a better translation. How is my translation from my skill to you? I'm not talking about obviously and linguistically, I'm talking about is my translation, is the way I'm presenting my teaching to you, does it have an accent? Or is it clear speech, right? Is it presented clearly? Is it presented with clarity, understanding, and how relatable is it? Because that's essentially what a lot of teaching is about. It's a way to relate. And that relatability, you don't really find much in academia. For instance, in left-minded topics such as math and science, you really don't need a lot of that type of skill. That's why a lot of that's why a lot of homework and homeschooling can be done on computers, because the fact of the matter is that you don't really, a computer is is a presenter of cold hard facts, right? And that's pretty much all you get. It's cold, blatant facts, down to earth. You write this down, you study it, and you repeat it, right? It's all based on reciprocation of what you understand of memory, right? It's all memory based, right? But that's so different from other skills like cooking and planting and things that involve your hands, right? It's things that tie a mix of your hand, of your physical and your mental, right? Cooking is a very seamless blend, like planting, of the mind and the body, and they coincide really in very strong ways. So I believe that there is a certain way to teach and there's a certain way not to teach. I've classified into two different subsectors. Number one is poetic language, and number two is direct language. So let's first dive into what direct language is. Direct language is mundane, and the speech is dead. The speech is a very dead, direct speech, and it lets you know exactly what you're supposed to do. Now, we move on to poetic language. Poetic language is very simple. It's poetic misuse of words. For example, when I say furniture of the mind obviously does not have furniture, but furniture of the mind is a phrase, but the word furniture is poetically misused, right? It's misused in a way that it does make sense. Now, it pinpoints the idea correctly, and the reason it sounds so poetic is because the mind, when you speak, right, the mind has a very strong instinct, a hunger almost, to put everything into context, right? The words, you hear the words, then you have your brain, literally the second step is your mind makes sense of the words. So when your mind makes sense of the words, right, so when you poetically misuse certain words, your mind obviously needs to register it, right? It's a very simple process. And it works 100% of the time, because 100% of the time your mind needs to make sense of what you're saying. So let's think of a few more examples of poetic misuses of words. Right, furniture of the mind is definitely one. It's actually relatively hard to think of on the spot, right? But I will. Hopefully, I'll remember a few by the end of the episode. So, furniture of the mind, right? It puts things into context, right? And what it does is it paints a better picture of what you're trying to teach the student. So, instead of saying, direct language would be coordinates 1 and 1.2. Poetic language would be like 1.21117 and 7.2223, right? It's much more calculated, much more methodical. And methodical and calculated are very mathematical words. But I'm talking about the fact that when you misuse language, right? They say that language is your thoughts are only as good as the way you can express them. Your thoughts are only as complex as the way you're able to form them. I forget who exactly said this, but it's a very famous quote, and it's a very famous idea, no less. And as you improve in English, right? That's why English is a very, very one of the most important subjects to learn in school, because that literally paints a very accurate picture of how complex your thoughts are, right? I love expanding my vocabulary. I love becoming more articulate and more articulate, because the more articulate I am, that, people believe that that's the only way to, it's all for presentation, right? Articulation is a very good thing to present yourself with. You sound intelligent, you are intelligent, right? But it goes so much deeper than that. You're number one, the thoughts that come up in your head are way more complex and multifaceted, right? They're multidimensional. Now, that's the thoughts. Next, you can express emotions better, right? Good, sad, happy, and bad are very, like, there was a poster in my 4th grade class. I remember this distinctly. It said graveyard words. And like it obviously means, right? Graveyard words are dead words. Like and, yes, no, but, right? It's just very simple simple words that are widely applicable. That is the key word. The key phrase here is widely applicable. The wider use the words have, the more direct language it is, right? So the bigger the umbrella is, when you talk, right? So when I'm delivering something, if I say, yes, yes, I did move the lamp. Yes, I did move the lamp means that, yeah, I moved the lamp, right? But if I use more poetic language, right, it's a very simple text, so it's difficult. But if I use more poetic language, the overall you would understand my idea better, right? You understand my response better. Now, having your thoughts more articulate is key because you are able to express emotions better and tasks better. Now, if there's one choice I can do to magically switch society to communicate better, right? People feel emotions, but people have a difficult time communicating them. And not because of mental walls or I'm not, it's emasculine, it's very masculine to communicate emotions, right? That's very superficial. But it's a very important, but the fact of the matter is that people can describe things physically because that's their perception of them, but it's very difficult to describe an emotion. Try describing what sadness is. Not about it, right? About it would be, oh, that's negativity, right? Negativity is sad. You don't give me attributes of sad. Give me the definition of sad. Don't give me a synonym. Because giving me a synonym or giving me an adjective does not tell me what the word is, right? You'll notice that it's very difficult to describe emotions. It's very, very hard. And the reality is that you need a very wide vocabulary to be able to pinpoint exactly what you're feeling. So it's really a really manipulative strategy, right? But if I had one way to tweak society, if you ask me what's one way you would tweak society for everyone for better overall peace and better communication, for better peace means better communication, and better communication means I would make everyone more articulate. I would broaden everyone's vocabulary, because the wider and more diverse your vocabulary is, you'll find that it's much easier to communicate exactly what you're feeling, right? Because when you can't express a feeling correctly or without accuracy to the way you want to feel like, right? A lot of times people don't feel like they're expressing what they feel correct 100%. And this results in people bottling up pain, right? If I'm angry, when kids are angry or when the kids have a lot of trauma, they tend to like I've noticed this in myself, right? I used to, and my brothers and people who I personally know who've had trauma, right, when they were kids, they've told me that the reality is people they hit and they become very physical because kids do not have a very diverse vocabulary. Kids have not mastered vocabulary, so they need to express their anger in many different ways. In different ways, and I mean, in a way, innovative ways, because they do not have the vocabulary to express themselves yet. As you become older, as you enter relationships, right? One of the reasons why it's known that relationships should be something of adulthood is because you do not, at a young age, you do not have a full grasp of what it's like. You can feel an emotion, but it means very little if you can't express it to the other person. So it serves so many important things. It serves so many important factors and points to be able to articulate exactly what's going on. And that's one way I would definitely tweak society. But before we move on to an actual example of what this is, I want to give a brief thanks to our sponsor. All right, so we're back. We just got back from speaking about how important society how important being articulate is in society, right? How it can make people flow and how it can make people more peaceful because they feel better expressed. That's a very, if I was in control of Google, if I was in control of technology, even a lower position, if I was in charge of searches and censorships on the internet, right? Because everything that you search up is adulterated. Technology picks up patterns and then adulterates your searches for a certain objective, be it to buy a certain product, be it for a certain political belief, right? I vividly remember a couple years ago when Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook was accused of manipulating different of search engines and Facebook algorithms to present you with, pro-Trump or no, or anti-Trump propaganda or whatever it was. I don't remember specifically, but the point is that if I was in control of searching adulteration, right? If I was in control of results and the way technology, the way your world is presented to you in terms of technology, I would 100% manipulate the results to make people, or manipulate articles and all that, and manipulate text media in order with more advanced vocabulary, in order so when you search up something or when you're reading an article, you don't understand the words, but there is a yearning to understand it, you would go search it up. It's a very, very strategic idea because people all the time talk about superficial ways to sorry, I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but people constantly talk about ways to innovatively make people more peaceful. Oh, we should put up billboards that say, just to calm down. We should maybe have a universal signal of how to honk our horns when we're on the road. There are changing the aesthetic of design and all that. I mean, just these understandable strategies of how to make people communicate better, make people more peaceful. But the real way is a lot of anger is harbored, a lot of emotion is harbored because they can't correctly articulate it. It always comes back to the root word of what they're feeling. I'm feeling bad or I'm feeling good, a binary word choice. But if I was in control, once again, I would make it 100%. I would make the articles, I would make everything you have to read, everything that you face on your phone, more articulate, with more complex word choice. So you would not only have to search it up, right? And this would extend far past your typical Forbes article. This would extend to the internet, the way you use games, anything you do on your phone, any work you do. Especially the internet, right? The words would no longer be it would be express, right? It makes people more poetic because that's literally, expression can heal so many communication problems. So articulation, clearly we see that it's has a direct correlation with painting a more specific picture of what you want. So painting a more specific picture of what you want promotes relatability, which in turn improves your teaching skills. So the other day we had a holiday party and I was assigned to make the sushi. Now, I have made sushi many times in the past, but my knife was not sharpened. And unfortunately, because my knife was not sharpened, I can cut the sushi, right? So if anyone's familiar with making sushi, right, once you finish the roll, right, the seaweed or the rice, whatever it may be, right, at that moment, I was specifically making with the seaweed or the nori outside. So the way it is it's the nori, then the rice, and then inside is your filling, right? So on the very bottom near the cutting board, is touching the seaweed. Now, here is my problem. I cut the roll from the top, right? It was just kind of sitting there in just like a big roll. Then I cut it, but the problem was that the bottom part of the roll was getting stuck. The seaweed even though I cut it, was still stuck to the other pieces. Now, every time I cut it, I just got more aggressive. I just like cut it and then cut it one after the other, right? And nothing was working. Obviously, I took a deep breath. I mean, this was like a whole experience, right? I took a deep breath and told myself, here would be an example of if I use direct language. Cut it with more force and try to separate them. Now, poetic language would be, when you cut it, don't develop an angry relationship with it. Just slice it through with no anger, just force, just calm force. Now, that's literally what I used poetic language when I spoke to myself, right? So when I say cut it hard, right, I would just kind of repeating the same action. That's very broad, direct language. But when I pinpoint and use certain lingual tactics, when you cut it, don't develop an angry relationship with it, right? Of course, you're not developing a relationship with the sushi, of course, but you have to. But when you're angry at it, there is emotion expressed toward the sushi because, or in the knife, or in the situation, because you're not cutting it fully. So I told myself, do not develop any angry relationship with it. Just slice it fully enough to with enough force to cut it 100% and not to break it. Right? I used very poetic language there, and believe it or not, it worked. So if someone else is doing it, right, that's fun for me, right? Because a lot of times people kind of figure out solutions without needing text in their head, without kind of articulating the words in their head. People just kind of figure it out based on just sight, and interacting with their hands, right? But a lot of times when you're trying to explain something, how to self to someone else, you say, when you cut it, don't develop an angry relationship with it. Just take a deep breath and separate them. Turn one into two with force and not anger. Right? It's very, there's no other way to put it except poetic. Right? When you're telling someone, cut it hard, so they're going to separate, right? It's just very broad language. The broader it is, the less of a vivid picture they have of what you're asking of them. And just to kind of sum up, this idea is applicable anywhere. It's applicable to anything. Poetic language equals a better picture. That's what you have to understand. And poetic language equals a better picture, which equals higher relatability, which equals better teaching, and a better transfer of your skill, right? So that we asked earlier how to better translate your skill, how to better translate my skill to you, right? This is the way you do it. You build relatability by using poetic language, which paints a better picture of what you want. So for instance, in writing, right, this is also a great writing tactic. I read an article the other day about Elon Musk's presentation of the Cybertruck, and the article, I kind of laughed at it because it was really funny language. It said something like this, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it said something like, this is not the first time Musk's theatrics have dropped his stock price. The stock price took a similar blow when he decided to smoke weed on the Joe Rogan show, end quote. So the article could have said Elon Musk's just his stock dropped at a rate of 3% because he decided to do something foolish on stage, but it wasn't. They used the word theatrics to better pinpoint exactly what they want, right? To better pinpoint exactly what actually happened, right? The better you see from my eyes, the better you will understand, right? So, and that just goes back to how sight is the primary way people understand reality. Musk's theatrics. So that immediately thinks, oh, you when you use descriptive words, I'm in your head, and I tell you, and I see, okay, so you think it's theatrics, gotcha. So now I'm looking at the thing, I'm looking at the image so differently. And by the way, here's another enlightening point about memes, right? Memes are a very, very popular form of making people laugh, especially on social media. So you'll see a lot of times one picture that's constantly circulating around, and I was previously involved in social media avidly, so I mean, I'm pretty familiar with how they'll take one picture, right? They'll take one stupid picture or one picture of someone with a reaction, and on the top they'll title it with different words which change your view of the picture, right? A lot of times a YouTube video will be just a mundane, just pretty mundane, right? It'll be a mundane video of a cat jumping from a chair to a desk. But that's not inherently funny. But when a comment says like, this is me, I don't know, jumping from my work to my weekend, or my weekend to work, right? It starts painting, you start looking at it with a super different paradigm, right? So that's the entire idea behind the relatability. When I tell you, when you cut it, don't develop an angry relationship with it, right? I'm trying to paint a better picture, be it a visual picture, theatrics, be it with text, like a meme, or just be it with any other area when you're trying to teach, right? It paints a better picture. It paints a very, very precise picture of what you were looking for. And that, by the way, extends to the other person's mind. It's a really, really interesting tactic. Before we close, I want to give a brief thanks to our sponsor. All right, so just last idea here, and I wanted to talk about how I want to just kind of branch off the idea earlier about we were talking about how to underhandedly change society by making society more peaceful through better verbal articulation. Now, people need to understand that that your thoughts are only the quality of your thoughts, the complexity and depth of your thoughts are only as good as your vocabulary. If you describe an event as sad, then there are a million events as sad. But if you describe an event as it was morose, depressing, melancholy, and saddening, then I understand, right? There are 4 words that, like a pinball machine, right? The stoppers of the walls kind of angle together, right? It kind of squeezes together or narrows the option. It narrows the image of what it's like, right? It narrows it down from just, let's say, a room to a room with white walls and ambient lighting, right? So now I have a better picture of what you want. And people personalize this better picture, going back to the fact that people need to put things into context. That is all teaching, and people instinctively connect all these different dots together, right? It's just about kind of noticing this clarity. And with that, we are going to close. So thank you very much for listening. All your support helps. Be sure to tune in daily for new episodes of Existential. So thank you very much for listening. And I am going to get a new mic very, very soon. Also, share this podcast with all your friends and family, everyone who's interested. This has been Existential. Thank you very much for listening.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.